it for having me. And my name is David Petty, and my talk is called the Not So Same Origin Policy. And basically, I'm going to be diving into the subtleties of like misconfigurations with the policy and how they can lead to exploits in web applications. So, a little bit about me. I recently graduated Northwestern University with a bachelor's in computer science. I'm currently associate security analyst at Independent Security Evaluators. It's here in Baltimore. And my interests are hacking, of course. I love video games, I play a couple musical instruments, and I love animals, and I've always had pets, including now. So I had to, sorry, but those are my two guinea pigs. Independent Security Evaluators, we're a security consulting firm here in Baltimore, Maryland, and we basically assess our clients' products for security flaws, report back to them, and then, so that they can fix them. And we're made up of hackers, cryptographers, reverse engineers, all of the above. And we like to have a white box perspective, meaning, of course, we attest from a pen testing standpoint on the front end of a product, but we like to see the full back-end design and to find any security flaws. And we have a wide variety of customers, but generally they're just companies with high-value assets that need to be protected. And we do also get to do a lot of research, which led to this talk. But we do focus on routers, NAS devices, and healthcare devices. And speaking of devices, I want to bring up the Iot Village, which we have actually hosting here tomorrow. I think it's 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. in Training Room 1. And basically, it's just a set of devices that we bring in. You can hack them, find 0 days, and then we know there's a set of them that are also vulnerable. So it's a lot of fun. You get to hack, learn a lot, and we hand out prizes. And we do this at a number of conferences, including the ones I have shown here. Okay, so overview of the talk. I'm going to summarize the same origin policy. I'm going to and talk about how it's enforced. I'm going to summarize cross-site request forgery because that's going to be our main attack when exploiting the policy. And then I'm going to go into bypassing the same origin policy with custom policies. And there's a number, including cross-origin resource sharing, and then custom policies for Flash, Java applets, and Silverlight applications. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about steps you can take to harden the policy. Okay, so who should care? Definitely web app developers, because this is going to help reduce your application's exposure to security flaws. And then definitely white hat hackers, because it's going to increase your insight on evaluating same origin policies and when they're going to be more or less secure. And then anyone basically is using the internet, it's important because it's going to give insight on why you shouldn't click untrusted links. Okay, same origin policy originated in 1995, and it's an incredibly important security mechanism for browsers and basically the entire internet because it restricts web pages from freely accessing data on other web pages. And I'll get into more detail in a sec. But the first thing is, what is an origin? And that is the protocol, host, and port number of a resource on the internet. So in this example here, HTTP is going to be the protocol, www.example.com is the host, and 80 is going to be the port. And so just to give a couple more examples, so this table is just referencing the URL I have above it, and if the origins are going to match or not. So the first two match the top because they have all of those three things in common. And then the third one has a different protocol, HTTPS. The fourth has a different port, 81. And the last two have different host names. Okay. The same origin policy basically states that any resource cannot access data on another resource on the internet through JavaScript unless they have the same origin. So in this scenario, if you're the user on the left and you visit site.a.com, and site.a.com includes JavaScript that dynamically creates a request to site.b.com, by default, the same origin policy restricts a response back. And this is to basically stop malicious web pages from freely accessing sensitive data on other web pages. So let's get into a little more detail. First thing is a simple get and post is allowed to be sent cross-origin. And that's because it was adopted early in the internet's history before Ajax came out. And then also here I have just some examples of when you can send this type of request in HTML tags. There are a couple more too. And then Ajax is really important because this allowed us to send and receive data asynchronously through the XML HTTP request. Okay, and like I said, the simple get and post request sent cross-origin by default the response will be restricted. And this is because it was adopted after Ajax and we knew the dangers by then. And of course, we don't want malicious pages accessing other data. Okay, and then there is some, non-simple requests, and basically this is a request that uses a special method or header, and you can see some examples I put in the bottom. And by default, the same origin policy will restrict these cross-origin, even the request, because they're pre-flighted, meaning they're going to send an options request first to the server with information on the request, and the server gets to evaluate if it's safe or not. And most of the time it's going to say no if it's cross-origin, or all the time it's going to say no if it's cross-origin. Okay. So it is important to keep in mind this is all context dependent. So like I said, AJAX responses by default are going to be restricted. But external hyperlinks on the internet, by the nature of it, are going to be allowed because the user has the chance to click on the link or not. And that's why untrusted links are very dangerous. Okay, so just to summarize cross-site request forgery, or CSRF, as I say, the first thing is the victim needs to be logged into a vulnerable website. And I'm going to talk about protections in a sec. And when they log in, they're going to receive a session cookie. Then the victim needs to be tricked into visiting a malicious page, and this is usually through phishing. Now, the actual malicious page is going to create a cross-site request to modify the vulnerable web app's server state. And this is usually in a POST request. It could be in a GET. And then the server is going to accept the request because, by default, browsers send cookies through cross-site requests. And that's important. That's why they're authenticated. And the reason this works within the constraints of the same origin policy is because the state-changing request doesn't require a response. So let's give some examples. First thing, common target sites, banks, social media, project management, but really anything that has high-value accounts or assets. And then some commonly forged requests. The classic is making a payment, so the attacker tricking the victim into paying them or emptying their bank account. Changing credentials so they can hijack the account. Escalating privileges could be creating a new account that has high privileges. And sabotage, of course, which would be like deleting a bunch of data. And cross-site scripting payload. And the reason why cross-site scripting and CSRF work really well together is because often an XSS attack requires authenticated requests. And if the web app also has a CSRF vulnerability, it's going to allow the attack to work. Okay. So there is protection. It's generally through a CSRF token. And this is just some parameter that's sent with any state-changing request that the attacker would have to guess. So it should be randomly generated, cryptographically secure. It should be generated per user session, so it's session-based. And it should be independent of other info, like cookies or server time. So whatever makes the attacker not be able to guess it. So this is like a fake example that I just created. But this would be some request to update your password. And if you have the CSRF token here as a body parameter, the attacker is not going to be able to guess it, essentially. Okay. So let's actually go into the same origin policy and custom configurations. So there are 3 custom policies I'm talking about, cross-origin resource sharing, CORS, cross-domain.xml, and client-access-policy.xml. And so these 3 policies have associated attack pages that could be used if they're configured insecurely. So for CORS, you can use basically any standard HTML web page. For cross-domain.xml, it's compatible with Flash, Java applets, and Silverlight. And client access policy is exclusive to Silverlight. And we're going to see attack examples soon. Okay, first though, I want to introduce my demo web apps. So they're found at demo.security-evaluators.com/dpetty. And on that page, it has, brief summary of this talk and instructions on where the links are and how to use the attack. And it's important to note that demo.security-evaluators.com is hosting the web applications, while demo2.security-evaluators.com is hosting the attack pages because it needs to demonstrate a cross-origin attack. And I do have the CSRF protection implemented in the web applications because I'm going to show how we can bypass it. And obviously the app looks awesome. You can buy apples or update your credit card, and it's completely arbitrary. It's just for demonstration. Okay. So let's talk about CORS. So it was developed by a World Wide Web consortium to basically standardize same origin policy configurations across the internet. So it's basically just a set of HTTP response headers that define what requests can be sent cross-origin, that the server will accept and send responses to. So the allow origin header in the top is whitelistingexample.com, that domain. Allow credentials header is saying if that cross-domain request can send cookies or not, so if it can be authenticated. And then the allow methods and allow headers just specify what methods and headers can also be sent. Okay. Now, the wildcard policy is really important because this is dangerous. And this just whitelists any third-party domain. And it's always shown by an asterisk in these examples. So for CORS, it's going to look like this. It's going to have this header set with the asterisk. And the reason why there's a limitation for CORS, however, because you cannot have the allow origin set to a wildcard policy and also have allow credentials set to true. So from the attacker standpoint, it's going to be harder if this configuration is set because you need to have your malicious requests authenticated. However, it's a limitation for developers too, because if you need to have authenticated requests from third-party domains that for the sake of functionality, then you can't use this policy. So for the sake of demonstration, I'm using this policy in my tests that I have below, which is basically just the server setting the allow origin header to whatever origin is sent with the request. So it's mimicking the same functionality, it's just doing it in a more dynamic way. So we're going to look at the wildcard policy. And this is my attack web page for cores. And it's probably really hard to see, so I'm going to kind of zoom in on parts. So we're going to look at this first part, but I do want to say the context of this is that the victim is logged in to the vulnerable web app and then has been tricked into visiting the link to this malicious web page. So the first thing it's going to do is going to send a GET request to mainpage.php, and main page is just where it showed where you can buy apples. And with the same origin policy using a weak configuration, the attack page is going to be able to see the response. So you see in the bottom here, I've highlighted var data is storing the response of the request, and that's going to look something like this. So you can see those are the cores headers being set, and it's an authenticated response. So or request. So the response is going to be the in the session of the victim. So and you can see in this response I've highlighted there's a CSRF token with the value. So the attacker now has the victim CSRF token in the response. So the next thing that's going to happen, this is down here, is we're going to take that response and parse it for the token. And this is sort of an elementary way of doing it, but it works. And then the attack page is going to now create, all on the same page, create a new request that's a post to buy.php, which is on the web app. And you can see that I've highlighted, it's setting a quantity of 1,000 and then putting the CSRF token parameter as the stolen token from the victim. So this is basically forcing the victim to buy 1,000 apples. Now this is super arbitrary, and in a real life attack, it would be something actually much more malicious. Okay, so let's look at crossdomain.xml. So this is another way to make a custom policy. And this one was made earlier than cores, and so it was more an ad hoc solution because they needed the functionality of allowing third-party domains. So this is compatible with Flash, Java applets, and Silverlight, and I do want to stress that these three are going to be used as the attack page. So as long as there's a crossdomain.xml on the web app, these three could possibly be used as attack pages. Okay, so first example of a policy is example.com. So you can see in the domain variable is just setting what domains are allowed. So that's whitelisting example.com. And then again, there's the wildcard policy. However, for crossdomain.xml, it's dangerous because there are no restrictions like cores. So that's just something to keep in mind. So we're again be looking at these policies. Now I'm going to use the Flash example for my second, but here actually, yeah, okay. So I'm zooming in on the part that actually matters here. And this is going to be doing a different type of attack, but utilizing the same, the same method. So basically what this request is, and again, the victim is logged in and is tricked into visiting this malicious web page. The first thing it's going to do is just create a GET request to editcard.php. And you're going to see what that web page has in a second. But first I want to show the policies actually in action. So you can see in your developer tools, if you have a policy or a cross-domain XML policy of example.com, visiting this malicious page on demo2.security-evaluators is going to get blocked. But then if you have a wildcard policy, you can see that editcard was sent and received a response. And there is the response from editcard, which has the victim's credit card number. So that's just another example of the attacker just using a GET request to access sensitive data. Okay. And then client access policy is very similar to cross-domain, except it's just exclusively for Silverlight, but it behaves in the same way, so there's not too much to talk about it. And I just wanted to give an example in this picture, which shows the wildcard policy with the asterisk. Okay, and there are other bypasses like Jsonp or JSON with padding. And basically, this is just another way, a modified way for two servers to exchange JSON data, but is not subject to the same origin policy because the browser looks at the script tag here or the exchange from the context of the web page that the scripts are on. So it evaluates the request from that origin instead of the actual target site. So if another site.com is malicious, it could possibly use and it could inject code through this response because, as I show here, it uses a callback function and it evaluates this as JavaScript. Okay. So some other things for Internet Explorer. There is under Internet Properties in the security zones, there is a custom level option that just disables any CORS protections. And the domains have to be in the same zone for that to work. But that is a very dangerous setting to have. And then the other thing is that IE doesn't regard port in terms of origins. So these two URLs here have the same protocol and host, different port, but they're considered the same origin. And you may think that that's not a problem, but there are some instances where it could be. For example, if port 80 is hosting a normal web application with sessions and sensitive data, but then port 8080 is just some arbitrary, like publicly accessible web app, but it has a cross-site scripting vulnerability. An attacker could use that vulnerability to trick a user into sending a request from the 8080 to the normal 81, and it would be authenticated and would receive a response because IE considers these the same origin. Okay. So to summarize some limitations, like I said, CORS, you can't have a wildcard policy while also sending cookies, so that's a limitation for developers and attackers. Java applets in Silverlight, it requires the victim to run the plugin, so you actually have to click like run, and some people will do that and some people won't. It is a limitation. And then there is limited plugin support for browsers. So as of March this year, the Firefox ESR, or extended support release, 32-bit is the only one that supports these plugins. And then there hasn't been Chrome support since September 2015, but for IE, there are no limitations. The ActiveX plugin still supports them. And then the only thing for Flash is it has to be enabled in the victim's browser for the attack page to run. Okay, so there are a couple things you can do to harden the same margin policy, but I want to stress that these are not fixes. They're just ways to harden. So the first thing is content security policy is a response header that a server can use, and it's just another way of whitelisting domains that can send cross-origin requests. So this could be used in lieu of a policy or in conjunction with it. And then X-frame options has much more limited control. It basically just prevents cross-origin requests from the frame and iframe tags. And then the same site cookie attribute, so if this is another thing a server can do, is set this attribute in the set cookie header. And if it's set, then that the web pages cannot or will not be able to or not receive requests with cookies. It will disregard the cookies. So that's another thing the attacker that would foil the attack because it needs to be authenticated request. Okay. So takeaways. First thing is same origin policy has a lot more nuances than you may think. So there are multiple ways you can configure it with a custom policy. They all behave a little bit differently, and you may not know what an attacker can actually do if you're using an insecure policy. And then a weakened same origin policy is definitely dangerous. Like I've shown with these attacks, it's allowing an attacker to either bypass CSRF protections or access other sensitive data on a web page. And then I guess the main point or goal is to optimally balance usability and security. So especially today, a lot of web applications need to include third-party domains for the sake of functionality, so they need to open up their same origin policy to allow them in. But the more you open up your policy, the riskier it's becoming because you can't control those third-party sites. So I guess the most important thing is we actually take the time to look at the same origin policy and secure it as much as we possibly can instead of simply using a lax configuration like a wildcard for the sake of convenience. And here's contact information. Slides will be up soon, probably this weekend, and feel free to ask me a couple questions right now if I have time, or just talk to me after. Thank you very much.